Getting harassed for criticizing Beijing, facing protests for supporting free speech. You think that's normal in China, but it's actually happening in the U.S. And today's Iris Tao brings us more behind a seemingly independent student protests on an American college campus.
The president of Purdue University is asking those who suppress free speech on behalf of Beijing to continue their education elsewhere. This comes after a Chinese student criticized the Chinese Communist Party online. He was then allegedly harassed by other students from China on campus, who threatened to report him to the Chinese authorities. But now, an online petition with over 1,000 signatures is protesting President Mitch Daniels' criticism of the alleged harassers. They say it's xenophobic and targeting everyone of Chinese nationality.
I don't want them to collect my information and report to Chinese government.
Tao Ge, who uses a pseudonym, is a Purdue University alumnus who's an outspoken online critic of the CCP. He says he fears being identified by the regime if he shows his face. By showing conversations in the Chinese student chat group that he's in, Ge says the petition is part of Beijing's long arm.
These type of things looks like independent. It looks like from a single Chinese students, but it's not.
He says it started and circulated by a group called CSSA, or the Chinese Students and Scholars Association at Purdue University.
They are controlled by Chinese government, and they are the people who control, who like monitor the Chinese students in the U.S. and see if they said something against the CCP.
A 2020 report by the State Department says there are 150 CSSA chapters on U.S. campuses. It says they're created and overseen by the Chinese regime. The purpose is to monitor Chinese students and mobilize them against views that dissent from the CCP's stance. Meanwhile, Ge points out the petition uses a narrative commonly used by Beijing to divert attention.
So it's nothing about the racial discrimination, but they want to mix everything together and just that you cannot focus on the topic itself.
President Daniel says those who harassed the outspoken student Zhi Haokong will face disciplinary action. He also criticizes Beijing sending secret police to threaten Kong's families in China. While the Chinese student group is protesting over Daniel's words, Ge says he appreciates the president's effort.
He tried to protect his students, his Chinese students who speak something in the U.S., and he also protects the freedom of speech in the campus in Purdue University.
Meanwhile, a different petition is calling for Purdue University to expel the students who allegedly harassed Kong. It's collected about 20,000 signatures. And Ge hopes more students like Kong can stay unintimidated and freely speak their minds in the U.S.
So don't be afraid for that. So just stand up and just support what is true, support the right thing and against the CCP.
Ge also calls for the U.S. to further restrict student groups that act on behalf of the Chinese regime on American campuses.
And tech giant Intel has issued an apology to China. The company made statements about forced labor in the Xinjiang region, which met with backlash on Chinese social media. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
An apology from U.S. tech giant Intel is going viral on the Chinese internet. A related hashtag has attracted over 300 million views and over 100,000 discussions. Intel apologized for making statements regarding forced labor in China. In a letter, the company told its suppliers to not source goods from China's Xinjiang region, citing concerns of forced labor there. Xinjiang is located in northwestern China. It's home to 12 million Uyghurs, a predominantly Muslim ethnic minority. Washington says Beijing is committing genocide against them through slave labor, mass detention, and forced sterilization. Beijing denies rights abuses in Xinjiang. Inside China, Intel's letter sparked massive controversy. A Communist Party tabloid says Intel bites the hand that feeds it. China is one of Intel's largest markets. The company made a quarter of its sales there last year, over $20 billion. Following the backlash, the company published an apology on Chinese social media platform Weibo. It says, although our original intention was to ensure compliance with U.S. laws, this letter has caused many questions and concerns among our cherished Chinese partners, which we deeply regret. But for some Chinese internet users, the apology is not enough. One internet user says, "Why should China do business with you since you're so insincere?" Another left a comment saying, "Then don't come to China to do business. Just go observe the law in the U.S." It's unclear if the Chinese internet users are aware of the rights abuses in Xinjiang. Related topics are heavily censored on the Chinese internet. And when Western companies speak out about them, Chinese state-controlled media fans nationalist anger against those companies. And Intel is not the first company that came under pressure after crossing Beijing's red line. Brands like H&M met with boycotts after expressing concerns about forced labor in Xinjiang. Adidas ran into a similar situation this year. Back in Washington, here's what the White House has to say about Intel's situation.
Well, I can't speak to the specific situation with one company, but I can say as a general matter that we believe the private sector and the international community should oppose the PRC's weaponizing of its markets to stifle support for human rights. We also think that American companies should never feel the need to apologize for standing up for fundamental human rights or opposing repression.
Saki goes on to say that in reality, companies that fail to address forced labor in their supply chains face serious legal risk, not just in the United States, but in Europe and other regions of the world.
A key U.S. ally in the Middle East is reportedly making its own missiles with Chinese technology, a move that could complicate the regional power struggle. NTD's Evelyn Lee has more on that.
Now we look to the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is reportedly making its own missiles with a little help from China, the kind of missiles that can deliver nuclear weapons. That's according to a report from CNN. The move could make it harder for the U.S. to constrain Iran's nuclear ambitions. Washington is looking to revive a deal to make Iran limit its nuclear weapons development. But Iran remains a top rival of Saudi Arabia's. And if Saudi Arabia is developing its own missiles, Iran may not want to be left behind. Saudi Arabia is a key U.S. ally in the region. It's one of America's top oil sources and also remains one of the U.S.'s largest trading partners in the region. Saudi Arabia has imported missiles from China before. The country didn't have the ability to create them at the time. At the same time, the U.S. has refused to sell ballistic missiles to Saudi Arabia for years. That's over concerns of nuclear proliferation. But now satellite images show Saudi Arabia is making its own missiles. A military expert told CNN that this burn pit is a key piece of proof, as sites like this are essential for missile production. That's because the manufacturing process creates leftover material that can be explosive, so facilities need a burn pit like this one to burn it off. And satellite images from late October show this burn pit is in full operation, from pre-burn to post-burn and post-burn cleanup. China helped Saudi Arabia to build this disposal site, but it's unclear if the missiles are of Chinese design. Saudi Arabia has also turned to other countries to develop the weapons. When asked if Saudi Arabia imported missile technology from China, Beijing said the two countries are strategic partners and have maintained cooperation in all fields, including military trade. NTD reached out to the Saudi embassy for comment, but did not receive a response before airtime.
Shares of Chinese e-commerce site JD.com plummeted today after its largest shareholder, Tencent, said it will give away most of its stake. It raises questions about Tencent's plans for other holdings. NTD's Cheney Wu has the details.
Shares of Chinese e-commerce site JD.com plunged as much as 11% today in Hong Kong, before closing down 7%, one of its biggest daily drops since it debuted in the city last year. Meanwhile, its biggest shareholder, Tencent stock, rose 4%. This comes after Tencent said Thursday it'll transfer about $16.4 billion worth of its JD.com stake to shareholders. It slashed Tencent's holding in JD.com from around 17% to 2.3% now.
I think it's a smart idea to give those wealth back to its shareholders so you become not so big of a target. It's probably going to accelerate its divesting activities, in other companies. So it won't be too prominent in the eyes of Chinese government.
Recently, Beijing's been clamping down on tech firms, trying to control their growth overseas and their market power domestically. Local authorities Thursday summoned 5 online platforms, including Alibaba Group's Taobao, Pinduoduo, and JD.com, over live streaming irregularities during the Singles' Day shopping festival, according to state-owned media. Business professor and Chinese expert Frank Xie says right now China's economy is crumbling, and this is one way for the regime to bring in more revenue.
Grab money from private sectors, companies like Tencent and others.
After Tencent reduced its stake, now Walmart is JD.com's biggest shareholder, owning a 9.3% stake. Xie warns that investors need to rethink their investment in big Chinese companies.
The American companies, American public or investors should be really careful about the Chinese economy and really consider some exit strategies now.
JD.com said the two companies would continue to keep their strategic partnership agreement, though Tencent executive director and president Martin Lau will step down from JD.com's board immediately.
China has moved to create a rare earth industry giant. That's by merging 3 of the country's leading rare earth producers into one. The Chinese regime would directly control the new company. The move could help China tighten its control over the global rare earth industry. And China is already a dominant player. It controls 80% of the global rare earth supply. Rare earth is important because it is essential for making high-tech products. For example, the U.S. needs rare earth to make laser weapons, cell phones, and airplanes. But the U.S. gets 80% of its rare earth from China. Given the tension between the U.S. and China, there's been growing concerns over relying on China for this strategic resource. And Japan has already gotten a taste of that. In 2010, China cut off rare earth exports to Japan following a diplomatic dispute, although it lifted the ban about a month later. The U.S. is on the move to diversify its rare earth supply chain. Earlier this year, the Pentagon gave an Australian company over $30 million to build a rare earth plant in Texas.
With Beijing increasingly flexing its military muscles, Australia is finding ways to bolster its defense capability. The country is set to overhaul its defense procurement process next year so that it's easier and faster for Australia to buy new weapons. It usually takes Australia 4 years to land a defense contract. But the new measures could reduce that time by as much as a year. Australia's Minister for Defence Industries says it could save millions of dollars.
And a region where tensions continue to rise.
The move comes after a warning from Australia's Defence Minister Peter Dutton. In a speech last month, he said China is on track to more than triple its nuclear warhead stockpile, and that every major city in Australia, including Hobart, is within range of China's missiles. Dutton added that Australia's defence industry can no longer be satisfied with a business-as-usual mindset. Instead, they must be driven by a mission of national significance and urgency. Australia has been on guard since its relations worsened with China. Last month, it signed a security pact with the US and the UK. Under it, Australia became the second country to get access to America's highly sensitive nuclear submarine technology.
This is the first time that the US and UK will have shared this information with a third country, ever. That was something worth securing. That was something that Australia has long sought, and our government has secured. It was worth securing access to this important defence technology and information.
The partnership would give Australia nuclear-powered submarines. They're quieter, faster, and can stay underwater longer.
This is a very important agreement for Australia's future security. There'll be plenty of others who don't want to see this go ahead. I think that tells you why it's so important that we do.
And just 2 weeks ago, Australia signed an over $700 million defense deal with South Korea. That's the largest defense contract that Australia has ever signed with a nation in Asia. It would give Australia radars, supply vehicles, and artillery weapons.